March 10th. Saturday or Sunday. It's a Sunday, I think. So, I'll go to 5%. We'll be getting. They have it up on the website. Yeah, the time. Yeah. No, for the event. I think it's 5:30. Oh, I'm sorry. There's usually a lot of people last year. I'm not sure about I'm taking a lunch stop. On like the anniversary, 1-year anniversary, I'm continuing to go back.
Okay.
That's what
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Iftikhar Hussain, and Sheikh Mendes and the board of MCGP invited me to conduct this 10-part course. So I thank you for the invitation, and I thank you for your participation. So we're supposed to start at 5, it's 5:06, so inshallah we'll get started if you are all right. This is a large hall. So I'm going to move around if that's okay with you as we begin this. And what I'll do first is just give us a quick overview of the 10 classes that we have ahead of us, including tonight. And then we'll move forward. Now, my expectation was that there was going to be a number of Muslims and non-Muslims, but I sense that we are primarily Muslims here. Is that correct? Okay. All right, so that might adjust how I present things, what might be useful for us. Are there any who are not Muslim here? No. Okay, I thought it was advertised, but that's okay. This is designed primarily for non-Muslim audiences, but Muslim audiences can. Yeah, that's okay. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to present it as I'm presenting it to a non-Muslim audience. And one of the things that I do with this course, I've taught this course dozens of times in the Philadelphia area, but I've also taught it to as a training session for Muslims to present Islam in an appropriate and contextually sensitive way to non-Muslim audiences. So we will do that, okay? Let's turn this sort of situation into an advantage where it will become very interactive. And I'd like you to share, as we go through this, how you present some of the things that I normally and traditionally present, okay? I'll tell you why I present it the way I do. And then, maybe there can be a learning. I'm very happy to learn from your experiences. How many of you have done interfaith work? Okay, all right. And you've presented easy things within Muslim tradition as well as difficult things, I'm sure, right? And there are challenges with that. Okay, so this is a 10-part course. I'm just going to go over some goals I set with audiences. So we will understand Muslim theology and jurisprudence using authoritative source texts of Islam. It's important for non-Muslim audiences to understand that there are authoritative source texts, right? What we call them, Quran and Sunnah, right? But there is this whole appreciate the historical development of source textual criticism by Muslims. What does that mean? This is the interactive part where you get to answer that question, right? What does it mean when I say appreciate the historical development of source textual criticism by Muslims? When you say the Quran and Sunnah don't have agency, by which I mean they don't speak to you directly with a voice. The understanding of the Quran and Sunnah is given voice by whom? Scholars, right? So there is an agency to understanding the Quran and the Sunnah, and that's the human agency. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed the Quran. He has sent the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who spoke to us. Okay, but the distance of 1400 plus years today, if you're going to understand the text today, what do? We rely on the understanding of scholars that go back through time. But we also engage the text today, and scholars who are trained in the sciences engage the text. Right? So there is this important thing to recognize, that there is a textual criticism. Criticism doesn't mean an anti-thing. It means how you critically deal with the text. Right? None of this should be new for you, but it's important to recognize that this is new to non-Muslim audiences. Right? Why? Because for non-Muslims, especially in the way Islam is presented, okay, or it's perceived in the media, that it's monolithic, right? There is one single way to understand Islam, that there's no diversity in how Islamic source texts are understood, okay, and that every Muslim thinks in one way. And by the way, that is the essentialized way as to how terrorists think about Islam, right? So there are Muslims who are terrorists, and the way they think about Islam is exactly the way 1.7 billion Muslims think, and so we should all be scared of them, right? This is the essentialized process of reducing Islam to that which is presented in the media. And this is a huge problem to overcome when you talk to non-Muslim friends, colleagues, and your neighbors, right? So it's important to help them understand that. Okay, understanding gender relations in Islamic source texts in Muslim societies, appreciate cultural impact on gender relations versus textual impact on gender relations. Well, what does that mean? So there's the text, and it speaks to gender issues. And then there is culture, Muslim culture within Muslim societies that also has an impact on how gender relations are managed within Muslim societies. And sometimes they're in agreement, and sometimes they're in conflict. Right? What we call, as a very simple example, what we call female genital mutilation in the American context. Right? Is that something that Muslim source text sanctions? How many of you think FMG is not sanctioned by Muslim source text? Your understanding. There's no right and wrong answer here. How many of you think it is sanctioned? How many of you think it is not sanctioned? Okay. So the majority of you think it's not sanctioned.
What does that exactly mean, not sanctioned?
Oh, sorry, apologize. So, does the Quran approve female genital mutilation? Or does Muslim understanding approve female genital mutilation? And the majority of you said, no, it does not approve female genital mutilation, right? The majority of Muslim scholars will agree with you. But there will be a tiny minority, and depending upon the epoch that you lived in, the historical Muslim experience, there will be maybe a larger number of Muslim scholars who will say, no, this is part of the Sunnah, right? It actually isn't part of the Sunnah, but it became part of the Sunnah simply because that practice was prevalent in certain societies, particularly in Africa. And as Islam spread into those societies, that practice remained within part of the culture. Now, you fast forward to America, and you ask an American who's not a Muslim, who's not lived in Muslim societies, doesn't understand the complexity of interpretive tradition, and if they hear that, they say, oh, well, Islam sanctions it. Because there are Muslims in Upper Egypt, or the Sudan, or certain parts of other Muslim countries that practice it. But that's not necessarily because it's sanctioned by Islam, but because it is part of the Muslim culture, or the culture where Muslims live. And you've got to learn to distinguish when you present this, not just to ourselves, but also to other audiences. Okay, finally, you'll appreciate the development of history in Muslim societies focused on science, technology, and economics, and culture cover the Golden Age period. I think that's very important for non-Muslim American audience to understand the richness and the diversity that Muslim societies created in the past and are capable of creating, even though Muslim societies today, by and large, seem to be sort of left behind, right? What's the big impact a Muslim country, individual, or a community made that is earth-shattering in the last 10 years?
Say rice place.
Okay. I'm talking about a Muslim society or an individual Muslim or a Muslim community that has made a large impact to humanity.
You had Muhammad Yunus's
Microloans. Amazing, right? But it took a bit of time for us to get to that. That's an amazing achievement by Muhammad Yunus, the Bengali economist who invented microloans and revolutionized how low-income or low-capital intensive loans can revolutionize society, right? He's done an amazing job. We could apply those to inner-city neighborhoods in the United States. Financial institutions don't do that in the United States. So that's an excellent example. What else? So what I'm trying to tell you is, you're not dying to raise your hand and tell me what this endless list is, because it's not an endless list. It's a very short list, right? So there is some issue with Muslim societies. And we'll explore what some of those might be. Okay? All right, so those are the goals of the course. All right? And we'll get started with the first deck, inshallah. Okay. What's the Arabic word, or the word you're more familiar with respect to the term theology? That's the English term, right? When you hear the term theology, what do you think of in terms of Arabic, or Urdu, or any other language, your native language? Religion, what else? Fiqh, but it's not fiqh. Theology is not fiqh. What else? There is another specific word, aqidah. Right? So if you know the word aqidah, that's what theology is. Right? Okay. Here's a tougher question. Who taught us aqidah? The Prophet. You're scared to say it. It's okay, you can say it. The Prophet taught us aqidah. Okay. I think that's a reasonable answer. Who developed aqidah? Did aqidah develop, or was it a static science? It's one of the sacred sciences, one of the most important sacred sciences. It's the first science that you, as a young scholar, might be taught if you are in a madrasa, in a 4-year college or seminary degree. Aqidah is the first thing you're taught. But aqidah is something that Muslim scholars developed. And it took time, the first 300 to 400 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, for aqidah to stabilize in the Sunni tradition as well as in the Shia tradition. Were you aware of that? That in the early days, within the first 50 years, after the first 50 years of the death of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a huge amount of controversies regarding aqidah. What we should believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? The Mu'tazilas emerged, and the Atharis emerged, and then they stabilized, and eventually in the Sunni tradition you have the Ash'ari and the Maturidian Athari traditions of aqidah that developed, which is what we have inherited today. If I asked you how many of you are Ash'ari, I can guarantee you nobody knows. How many of you are Ash'ari? But that's okay, it's not a problem. It's just that part of our tradition, because we're not trained in seminaries, or we're not taught in a structured manner, so none of us can answer, are you Ash'ari in your theology, in your aqidah, or are you Maturidi, or are you Athari? What are you? Because those are the 3 systems in Sunni tradition. There are 3 others in the Shia tradition. But it's hard to know, because again, there has been a separation from our tradition of the ulama and our tradition of lay people and that connection. Right? So I think that's important. Okay, so we'll do theology and orthopraxy, which is simply another fancy way of saying the Sunnah practice or the core practices of the Muslim tradition. We'll look at sources of jurisprudence, inshallah. Okay, now this is sort of redundant for you as an audience because, again, there is no non-Muslim here. But these are some of the things we go over. You know, we start with the Quran, sources of authority. I give a historical background of the Quran. It's important when you deal with and interact with non-Muslim colleagues and friends and neighbors that they have a flavor for the verses of the Quran. They'll be familiar as Christians and Jews with biblical text, somewhat familiar, if they went to some level of Sunday school in their own churches, right? But if you ask them, tell me the most commonly recited verse from the Quran, they wouldn't know. So it's an opportunity to help them understand Surah Al-Fatiha and some of the other verses. Okay, so we'll go over these. We'll go over some of these ideas. How is other faith traditions viewed from the context of the Quran and the Sunnah? Right? Salvation. Who's going to hell? Who's going to heaven? These are very important questions that the Sunni tradition, the Muslim tradition answers. But what does it say? And this is a question that non-Muslims are interested in knowing. What does it say about them? Does it say anything about them? Right? So that's important for them to understand. Okay. Let's get started. Now, some of these things, fatwa and sharia, I think will be useful for us as a group of individuals interacting. The Quran is obviously very straightforward in terms of definition for us, and the Sunnah is also straightforward. However, the Sunnah, in a technical way, is defined as three things, right? The sayings, right? The deeds, and the approvals or disapprovals of the Prophet ﷺ. All three of those constitute Sunnah. Sometimes we limit the Sunnah to the Hadith, right? Does the Hadith cover everything about the Prophet? Please think about this question. Does the Hadith literature, the 6 books in the Sunni tradition and some of the other ones in the Shia tradition, do they cover comprehensively everything about the Prophet? Okay, if it doesn't, then the next question to all of you is, what other type of literature covers other information about the Prophet? The Sirah, thank you. What else? The Shama'il. Okay. Wow, this is a Sheikh Mendy's inspired audience, right? So the Hadith.
That fatwa came about. Did the Prophet ever say fatwa? Or
Constantly, yeah. Every time he was asked a question, he gave an answer, and that's what a fatwa is. And we'll look at the definition of the fatwa. So the Shama'il literature, that which praises the personal behavior of the Prophet and expounds upon it and details it. This Shama'il tradition, in classical Muslim societies, the Shama'il tradition was heavily taught, right? And in the American context, we haven't had Shama'il books taught to us, which created a deeply rooted love of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? I think as we get more trained imams in our societies who understand America, who understand Islam and can speak, the Shama'il tradition is being rejuvenated in the Muslim tradition, in the American tradition anyway, in the American context. So Shama'il literature, the Sirah literature, the Hadith, which all of these combined together is what helps us understand how the Prophet ﷺ, who he was, how he lived, how he operated. But a less than classically oriented understanding of the Quran and Sunnah will lead us to reduce the sources of literature that define prophetic behavior. But you are very comfortable knowing those three, which is excellent. Okay, what is a fatwa? Don't read. Tell me. What do you know about a fatwa? Define it. Don't read. Some of you are reading. Don't read. Tell me what you think is a fatwa. But be as precise as possible. I know it's so hard not to read. So tell me, what is it?
The combination of not coming together to...
No. Usually it's one person. Islamic law. Islamic law is very broad. It's composed of many fatwa, right? What else? Describe it. You can read now, that's okay.
Opinion,
Opinion.
based on the opinion of the matter based on myself,
Whose opinion?
the opinion of the scholar.
Who's a scholar?
Knowledge about the Islam group.
How do you determine a scholar? The qualifications of a scholar.
Yes, I have knowledge of the Islam group.
Maybe a jurist, maybe a qadi.
Qadi. You don't have to be a qadi to be one who issues a fatwa. A qadi is a person who is a judge, but before he's a qadi, he is a mufti. Okay? Sometimes a qadi can be a qadi without being a mufti. A mufti is a higher level designation in the Sunni tradition. It indicates a qualification that's higher than a qadi. Okay? Many of our judges, our qadi, were muftis. Right? But here's the danger with those titles if you are not tuned into the specific Sunni definitions. How many of you know of muftis today in America? Very few. But there are people who have the title mufti in front of them.
Pretty loosely used.
Oh yeah, that's the huge danger with the title. Now, in some emails from Zishan that I got, either Zishan or Brother Yusuf, is he here? He called me Ustad. What does that mean? Okay. How do you know I'm a teacher? What qualifies me to be here? One thing, somebody recommended me to come.
Can you do the fatwa?
Can we do the fatwa?
You.
Can I do the fatwa?
As Islamic scholar?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I don't have the qualification.
Why?
So,
Why?
that's exactly why.
I'm sorry?
Is your judgment that you cannot do it, or?
Oh, so now what we have done, and thank you for saying, what is your name?
Yeah.
Sufyan. So Brother Sufyan has told us something that is that's a very very instinctive thing that we try to do. Fatwa is an opinion, anybody's opinion. No, fatwa is the opinion. It's a legal, non-binding ruling of a jurist or a scholar trained within an Islamic school of jurisprudence. How many of you have trained in a specific school of jurisprudence, whether it is Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, or Hanafi, or Ismaili, or Ithna Ashari, or Ibadi? Those are the three juristic schools in the Shia tradition. How many of you are trained in one of those seven? Anybody? Do you think I'm trained in that?
No, just
Have a flavor, but I'm not trained in it. Yes.
General crash.
Yes.
You remember in Iran, Ahmad Rushdie wrote a book about
Yes, I'm understanding.
that somebody gets up and say, okay, he's a fatwa, somebody's gonna kill him, because he said bad thing.
It was a fatwa.
So, as a Jewish speaker, or Jewish like, or whatever it is, right, it's gotta be Islamic scholar who knows Islam, or?
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, a fatwa in the Muslim tradition is not accepted by Brother Sajid or Brother Iftikhar. Because either Brother Sajid or Brother Iftikhar are trained in the juristic sciences. If he decides to get trained in the juristic sciences, how many years do you think it will take you? 7.
I mean,
It'll take me 10 years.
I'm just telling you.
You're a fast student. By the way, I'm going to pick on Brother Sajid and sort of foil, right? Just for context. Okay, so this is important to recognize the level of training that goes into being a jurist, to being one who's qualified to make fatwa. If you go through University of Medina, Qura, any one of the Al-Azhar, after 4 years, can you make a fatwa after 4 years? No. No. You see, so here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. How many engineers here? One engineer. Are you a PE? No. Okay. You're not a PE. But an engineer who's not a professional engineer certified can do a lot of engineering tasks. But when it comes to either governmental contracts or certain types of constructions and engineering activities, you cannot be the engineer without a PE signing off on those designs or on those projects and plans, right? So it's very simple. And this is a very simple thing, and this example is repeated in the Muslim tradition. Doctors, many of our jurists were actually physicians, right? It's an interesting reason why, but which is not to get into it right now. But physicians today, in our context, will you go to a physician who is not board certified by the AMA? You want how many physicians here? There should be way more physicians. This is our joke with physicians, right? Yeah, huh?
No, I won't go, unless it's certified physician.
You are.
I said I won't,
Oh,
unless it's certified.
you won't, yes, of course. So we won't go to a physician who's not certified, but we'll take fatwa from anybody. We will take fatwa from Sheikh Google, Sheikh Yahya, Sheikh Bing. I mean, this is amazing that we can do that. So we have reduced the qualification required to issue a fatwa. Now, let's go back and be sure of this thing. I said it's legal and non-binding. Can somebody respond to that? I'll clarify, but respond to that, those two words or adjectives. How is it legal and what does non-binding mean?
Binding means if you ask for fatwa, if you agree with the opinion of the scholars who give you the fatwa, you are bound by it. If you don't agree with it, you're not bound by it. But you can't pick and choose.
Okay.
If you give you a fatwa, you gotta follow the whole fatwa.
Okay.
And then he takes the responsibility for it, which
Okay.
is the hardest part.
Abu Sufyan, sorry. Sufyan has introduced like 3 or 4 very complex ideas in that short 30-second statement he made, right? And we will sort of peel the onion on that. So the important thing to recognize is that it's a legal opinion, okay? It's a legal answer to a legal technical question. And whether the question is about how to fold your hand in salah, or it's a question about divorce, or it's a question about criminal law, or it's a question about any of the aspects of Sharia, at the end of the day, it's a very technical answer. And it's an answer that a trained person must give. Okay? All of us can have opinions, that's not a problem. And in that way, a fatwa sounds like just an opinion. But an opinion of a trained person is vastly different than an opinion of a person who dabbles in something, you know, reads a few books here and there. That's something we have to appreciate about our tradition. Our tradition was highly intellectual, okay? Our tradition didn't allow anybody to speak on these matters. You have to go through immense amount of training. You know, we said 7 years or 10 years. Most of the traditional muftis in the Muslim history, they would study 15 to 20 years before they felt confident in answering the question in terms of a fatwa. Because a fatwa really is answering a question that hasn't been asked before, or answering a question that has been asked before but has a new complication or a twist to it, right? It's easy to regurgitate the answers our scholars gave. That can be done. I could do that for you. I have enough training to do that. But to have training to issue a fatwa, that's a heavy responsibility. So I think that's important. Now, the non-binding part, Sufyan said something, and I want to sort of drill into that. A fatwa by a scholar is non-binding in the sense that it is his or her specific understanding of the text. Because Islam and its juristic tradition is highly decentralized, and I want to ensure that we understand it, it's decentralized. Which means that if I'm a scholar and I give you a fatwa, you're not bound to follow me. Unless you choose to follow me. But you're not bound to follow me. Right? So that's why it's non-binding. When does it become binding? There's only one context in which it becomes binding. When does it become binding?
When I like something, it's binding.
No.
No,
It's still not binding. You choose, okay, now we're talking about societally binding. Okay, so let me clarify. If you choose to follow a fatwa, you've only chosen for yourself. Because I chose, I can't force my wife to choose, or my son or my daughter to choose. Can't force my parents to choose. It's part of the tradition. Okay, so it is only for me if I choose it, and I'm choosing it as a non-scholar. Okay, if I'm a scholar, then there's a different way I'm going to deal with it, right? I'm going to have a higher level of critical ability to assess the quality and the relevance of the fatwa. Okay. In most cases, those who are not trained will simply ask a question of their local imam, who may or may not be trained in being able to issue a fatwa, and they'll follow the answer. And many of the questions are not fatwa based, because you don't need a fatwa. Okay, it's a question that already has an answer, well-established answer. So it's just a conveyance of the answer. But if it needs a fatwa, that's when it gets more difficult. And so we should be careful about seeking fatwas, because that's a question that you have come up with a question or a scenario that hasn't been answered. Right? So it's a very unique thing, very new thing, or maybe it's a very complex thing.
So as you said, it's decentralized because of their confusion it begins. By not, don't like your fatwa, go to other where he said, yeah, I like it.
Yes.
It's decentralized. How when you're going to make it centralized? Just like Christianity is, you go to Rome.
Yeah, okay, so, but only Catholics go to Rome. Otherwise, Christianity is highly decentralized, exactly as the Sunni tradition. Okay, here's the good news, and here's the not so good news. The not so good news I'll give you first, because then we can enjoy the good news. The not so good news is that because Muslim tradition has been highly decentralized, there's no single authority that spoke for Islam exclusive to other authorities. You have the Hanafi tradition, the Maliki tradition, the Hanbali tradition, the Shafi'i tradition. You had schools that grew up around these core teachers. At the time that these four lived, how many other schools were there? In the tens, some scholars claim the hundreds. Most of them dissipated. Either they joined or dissipated. These four survived. This is Allah's wish as to why. Or if you want a technical answer, we'll have another class as to why these four survived. And the Saudi school didn't survive, and there's so many other scholars from the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in whose schools didn't survive. Right?
What about the Shia?
Yeah, I mean, there is the three that I mentioned. The Ismaili tradition, actually the Twelver, the Iranian Shia tradition. Iran, up until the 1600s, was not Shia majority, it was Sunni majority. Right? It's only until the Safavids who adopted the Shia tradition that Iran, as what we know of as Iran, Persia, became central to the Shia tradition. But that's a historical thing. So, it's non-binding. The only time it becomes binding is if you're living in a state which adopts that for its institutional functions. Right? And we're not talking about how you hold your arms in salah. I mean, that's a very private ibadah issue. I'm talking about mu'amalat issues. What's the difference? Ibadat are the rules around your ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mu'amala are all of those issues in the Sharia tradition that have to do with dealing with each other. Marriage, divorce, criminal law, business law, political law, to the extent that Muslim Sharia tradition has informs us of political law, like shura and governance and those kinds of things. So most of the fatwas that have emerged over the last 1400 plus years, they're non-binding, right? That doesn't mean they're for anybody. No, it just simply means that it cannot be enforced unless a state adopts it. So the Ottoman Empire, as a Muslim empire or Muslim Khilafah, what was their adopted juristic tradition? Who said Hanafi? Okay, you're right. They were Hanafis. Did they allow non-Hanafi courts within the Ottoman Empire? They did. Okay, it's highly restricted. So if you were a Shafi'i living in the Ottoman Empire and you wanted an adjudication of a question in the Sharia tradition through a Shafi'i court, you could go to a Shafi'i court. Okay, all of these empires, political entities that existed, by and large allowed the expression of non-majority school of jurisprudence within their political governance. Not all of them, but the majority did. Okay? Because that's how the tradition developed. Right? That there was immense respect amongst the scholars of each of these traditions for each other. Right? And we saw that with the way Shafi'i treated Abu Hanifa and so on, right? I mean, you hear these things, right? in the Sharia tradition, of the great respect they had for each other's differences. And the ulama from the very beginning, and this is a point I emphasize to our non-Muslim friends, the Muslim Sharia tradition, the Muslim legal tradition, juristic tradition, emphasized that and protected the ability of and promoted difference and diversity of opinion or of positions. Okay? Just because a Shafi'i scholar differed with another Shafi'i scholar, and both of them differed with the Hanafi and the Maliki scholar, didn't mean they cut each other's throats. Right? They promoted that difference while keeping to their own understanding. They promoted within society the acceptance of these multiple traditions. And that is one of the biggest contributions, intellectual contributions of Muslim society traditionally. Right? How many of you know the imama that the imams wear? I'm not wearing mine today. The cloak. Not the thobe, but the abaya. This was a sign of knowledge, right? What I'm wearing. What do you think Muslim scholars wore? Huh?
Depends what they did.
Depends where they live, but if you graduated from Al-Azhar or from Qayrawaniun or one of the other universities, right? Hammam, right? You would wear this, or you would wear it around your head, right? Okay? Now, how many of you have children who graduated from college recently? Okay, what did they wear? That hat, right? What did they do with the tassel? What did they do with the tassel? Well, where did they flip it? Nobody is paying attention? They flip it to one side, from the left to the right or the right to the left?
I'll take it down, right to left.
Huh? Actually, I don't know the answer I'm asking you. So they flip it from one side to the other. This is exactly what the scholars did when they graduated. They would take right, the thing that hung to the side. It's not long enough. Anyway, they would take what hung to the side, right, like this, and they would flip it to the other side as a demonstration of having been qualified now to either teach or issue fatwa and so on. Okay? What do you think all the graduates do when they wear that cloak? They're imitating, right, the practice of Muslims. Thank you. So this is important to recognize that Muslim scholarship around the world, its intellectual output was amazing. Today, we are challenged with finding Muslim intellectual output. But many scholars, including George Salim of Columbia University, will argue that the whole Renaissance that occurred in Europe, its seeds came from Andalus. And its seeds of reform and intellectual rigor came from Andalus, came from Muslim empires. And the university, okay, so that's a fatwa. It's a non-binding legal opinion of a scholar trained in a school of jurisprudence. And by that I mean that he or she is a graduate of a program, of a rigorous program. Okay, and today those programs are part of the Azhar institution or any of the universities that are there. But the quality has diminished, no doubt. Okay, and there are reasons for that which, inshallah, we can explore. Okay, time for salah, right?
Thanks.
Yeah. So shall we break here and then we'll pray and then we'll come back. But that's not.
No, that's exactly right, but I'm gonna tell you what you are doing.
No, no, no.
You know, sometimes I'm not a scholar and I just keep, I'm a doctor, I'll like reading on my hand and I can read the best. Me.
Assalamu alaikum. So inshallah we'll get started. I'll give a couple more minutes for people to grab their drinks and cake and so on. Okay, so before we move off of fatwa, any questions? Remember, you can always interrupt me with a question. Yes.
So you gave an example of the non-binding.
Yes.
You said you were going to give this example of binding.
Binding, yeah. So anything that becomes binding also becomes enforceable. And who can enforce? Sajid, you cannot enforce on me, I cannot enforce on me. It has to be a state, an authority, a political, administrative authority that can enforce, right? So it becomes binding only when a state authority or state institution that issues it, or if a judge in a court of law issues it, right? So you could have a question. Say you have a question about marriage, okay? And it's a question that is sort of a slightly new question that hasn't been answered in the fiqh books of the past. You could go to Sheikh Mendes. What's his fiqh reference? Is Maliki. How many of you are Malikis? Okay, so you're cool. But the rest of us are stuck. What do we do? Right? Well, I think about Sheikh Mendes, depending upon which science it is, he has an exposure. Right? So he could help a Hanafi or Shafi'i or a Hanbali to answer a question, but he himself is Maliki. So here's the deal. You ask him a question, and in general, I'll make another point. When you don't follow a particular school of thought, then you follow the school of thought of your imam, teacher, whoever it is that you go to answer. So you may not be Maliki, but he might give you Maliki answers, and therefore you are by default an unknown Maliki, right? Because he'll probably give you Maliki answers, okay? But I know what he does is he tells you the Maliki answer is this, and the other answer, let me look it up, or whatever he might do. So Sheikh Mendes' answer is non-binding. He has no administrative or political authority to make it binding on you. Okay? Now, if there were Sharia court here, and you went to the Sharia court with a question, and the judge in the Sharia court, appointed by the relevant bodies, gave you an opinion, it becomes binding. Do you know that there are Jewish religious courts in the United States? Did you know that? There are 2 Jewish courts recognized by the conservative Jewish movement, school of thought, if you will, or the Reform, and the Reform, and even the Reconstructionists. There are 5 schools of thought, or schools of jurisprudence in the modern Jewish tradition. So there are 2 courts, both based in New York, that recognize it. So when people, and this is an important point I want us to sort of debate about, right? When Muslims talk about Sharia courts, you know, the Islamophobes say, oh my God, they're going to take over America, right? This is a trope. It's a lie. Because Sharia courts can exist without any challenge to the U.S. constitutional system. Okay. Now, I'm making that a statement. I want to engage this in a conversation because this is a very important thing, and when I have a non-Muslim audience, I spend a bit of time on Sharia because of the fear of the Sharia bogeyman, right? That is so prevalent in America. Okay, so let's talk about Sharia. Okay, let's talk about scope first. What does the U.S. constitutional system? What is its scope? What does it cover? And I'll help you answer this question. Does it cover issues around the businesses you own? It does. Very little. The U.S. Constitution covers very little of financial matters and business transactional matters. Very little. Does it cover how you organize the political administration of the United States as a country? There's a lot in it, right? The 3 branches of government and so on and so forth. Does it cover basic rights? The Bill of Rights, right? That's a big one, right? So the US Constitution covers a number of things, but it's not exhaustive. It doesn't cover what you think about Allah, does it? There's nothing to do about Allah, but it recognizes Allah in the preamble maybe. But it doesn't tell you anything about what to believe about Allah or what Allah tells us to believe, right? Okay, now let's answer the question about Sharia. What does Sharia's scope entail? Is it all-encompassing? Is it deep and broad? That's one question. Another question might be, what does Sharia not cover? What areas of your life does Sharia not cover? Okay, it might be difficult to sort of think if you have not thought about it before. Does Sharia cover how you go to the bathroom? it does. It tells you to make a dua before you enter the bathroom, a dua that you come out. But that is ibadat. The Sharia, from the very beginning, distributed all of its content into two very broad categories, ibadat and mu'amalat. If you compare the US Constitution, nothing in the US Constitution talks about ibadat. Everything in the US Constitution is one or more aspects of your mu'amalat. And the definition of ibadat and mu'amalat, again to repeat it, ibadat is those things that have law implications or rule implication in your worship of Allah, your relationship to Allah, and those things that have law or rule implications in your relationship to everyone else, between you and everyone else, right? That's mu'amalat. So these are the two broad scopes of the Sharia or categories. But in mu'amalat, is there anything in the Sharia tradition that is not covered? And it's a hard question to answer, and I want to make you feel comfortable. It's a hard question to answer, right? Because there's sort of debate. One class of scholars will tell you there's nothing in your life, in the mu'amalat side or on the ibadat side, that Sharia doesn't cover. Theoretically or potentially, right? There might be a question you ask, and the Sharia might not have an answer, but the scholar will construct an answer based on tradition and based on precedents and so on and so forth. Right? So how many of you sort of feel inclined to answer the question about the scope being everything? And how many of you might answer and say, well, it may not be everything, maybe there are some things in our life that Sharia doesn't cover. So who's in the first camp? It covers everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can I assume the rest of you are in the other camp? So then can you give me some examples of what it doesn't cover? Yes.
There's the area of ta'dil,
Okay.
discretionary
Mhm.
litigation, like for example,
Yeah.
traffic regulation.
Yes.
Whether there be 3 lanes or 2,
Yes.
whether red light being stopped.
Yes.
This is ta'dil, this is discretionary.
Yes. Yes. The scholars from this group will tell you, no, that's covered under Sharia, because those laws are ultimately adjudicated by judges in a Sharia court. So they become in scope. So the scholars who say everything is in scope, they include everything for which we have source text, and for which we use source text to sort of derive. So, why 3 lanes and 2 lanes? What ayah sunnah are you using? You're using general principles, whether it's ethical, moral, or some of the other principles in the Quran, categorized. You're using common sense, right? You're using specialized knowledge, right? All of which are tools in answering any question of Sharia. Okay, so that was one example that you could classify as outside of the scope of Sharia, but that other camp, Zishan's camp, will say, oh no, that's already under Sharia. Okay, any other example that you could think of? Not covered by Sharia.
The environmental, all the issues of environmental issues.
Okay. Okay. As you can see, I'm of that camp. Because I can argue back and say, no, Allah has told us that there is nothing He has created that doesn't worship Him, number one. And then I derive from that any creature that He has created around me, I must interact with them with balance and restraint. And therefore, I can make a very good case of environmental protection and preservation and so on. Right? So any of those environmental conversations that we have in the American context, and as Muslims, I can reconstitute under the Sharia tradition. That this is part of the scope of our ethical and moral responsibility to our environment. Okay? Even though the scholars didn't talk about environmental ethics in the Muslim tradition, they talked about the same issues we're talking about under different sciences. Okay? So, the conversations are around restraint, right? When we restrain, when we consume, and a restrained consumption, right? We have promiscuous consumption in America and in the Western world today, right? Muslim societies talked about restrained consumption, that you don't consume without limits, both of God and of our self-imposed limits. So in many ways, you can argue that that thing which you are suggesting, and there's the validity in that view, that it's not part of scope, was already part of the scope, but not using the same terms and sort of frames of reference. Okay, so I want to just leave this question about that there is a debate. That some scholars will think everything is in scope because everything can be brought under the scope of a Quranic worldview or Sunnah worldview or a Sharia worldview. And there are others who will say, well, yeah, these are all under that scope, and some of these things, there's no guidance. Right? So here's an interesting thing, the sources of Sharia. One of the key ideas of Sharia, and then we'll move on to Sharia, is urf. Who knows what urf is? You have all the answers. Who has you studied with? Okay, urf, anyone else? Customs. Thank you. So urf, now you get to answer. Go ahead. Please.
Yeah, absolutely, custom.
Custom,
In
yes.
absence of text, the expectation is custom.
Yes. So the Sharia tradition, one of the principles of the Sharia tradition, right, usul, in the usul of Sharia, usul al-fiqh, is that tradition, local culture, is muhakkama, meaning it is the order unless it contravenes some very specific text. It has to contradict the nas. It has to contradict the text, either the Quranic text or a Sunnah text. Right? If it contradicts it directly, or one can argue that it contradicts it, then that cultural practice has to be buried, removed. Eating pizza. It's the thing Americans do. Things all your kids do. I don't know if you guys eat pizza, but all your kids do. Right? You like pizza? Alhamdulillah. He is culturally American. How many of you are against, let's make this a comfortable conversation. How many of you are against celebrating Valentine's or Valentine's Day or Thanksgiving or what's that other thing in October? Halloween, right? This is like the last 50 years we've been talking about it in the United States, right? Most of us are less than 50 here, you're older. So we've been having this debate, should we or should we not do Halloween, should we or should we not do. The reason why we have these debates is because we don't have a shared framework of Sharia and this question of urf, local practice. Local practice, the scholars determined in the Sharia tradition, they're okay, unless there is a clear harm that comes from the local practice. Right? The local practice of the Arabs of this hospitality for 3 days, this was a Bedouin practice. It was not as much a practice of the city dwellers, city Arabs, but it was a practice of the Bedouin Arabs. That if you came out of the desert looking disheveled and thirsty, no questions asked, you come into the tent, you have food, shelter for 3 days, water also. Do you know that the Muslim tradition transformed this into a Muslim practice? Right? It became a Muslim practice. It was an Arab Bedouin practice, not even a city practice. It was a Bedouin desert practice. Rasulullah said this is a wonderful practice, and he converted and institutionalized it into the general expression of Islam. But it was a localized practice. If you go to Indonesia, all right, you have a mosque. Some of the mosques in the forest will have in the entrance, they will have a very shallow basin, which are full of fish. I don't think you have ever seen this. And to enter the mosque, you have to go through that. You have to walk through the little shallow pool with fish in it. Okay? Why did they do that? Because you wash your feet, and the fish have food. And they grow the fish in there. This is a feature of many masajid in the rural areas of Indonesia. Haram? Isn't that haram?
No.
Why not? Why isn't it haram? I mean, who thought of water and fish in front of a masjid?
I think there's proper reason, dirty fish will,
It's an urfi implementation. Okay? If you go to China, you will find women exclusive mosques where the imam is a woman, where the teachers are women, where the muaddin is a woman, and where only women are allowed. Isn't this haram? It's an urfi practice. They institutionalized this in China for whatever reason. I mean, you can read Omar Farooq Abdullah's sort of case study of why it emerged in China. There's no other country that does this. Women-exclusive mosques, where is it? In any other Muslim country today?
I think it's a good thing.
Bad, good, that's a different question. But I mean, you guys can debate that, that's not the point. The point is, it emerged as an urfi practice in China. And it would be interesting to figure out why. There are many sisters I talk to, they would love to have that here. In this country. Yeah, I'll tell you what. You have an exceptional masjid.
What about Azan and Maghrib?
Yeah, the woman doesn't. No, why not? What fiqh opinion do you follow? That prevents you from doing that. There's no prevention. There's no principle thing. When the Prophet ﷺ went to outside of the city of Medina, and most of you have been to Medina. It looks huge now, right? Well, the city of Medina, if you go today, the whole city was the current compound of the Haram, right? City of Medina is much bigger than the current compound. But that current compound, the limits right now, today's limits, that was the outer limits of the city at the time of the Prophet. So the Prophet would go out to visit this woman who was an older woman. She was probably in her late 40s. And he gave her permission to be the one to lead the salah in her little village with 2 or 3 households. How many of you know that? Well, maybe some of you know this. Okay? And he gave that permission. It's just that that position, that fiqhi possibility, never found institutionalized support in Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, or the fourth method I own is Hanafi. I'm a Shanafi, by the way. What's a Shanafi? It's a cross between Shafi and Hanafi. Some people tell me that I'm Shanafi. I'm not a Shanafi. Okay, so the important thing to recognize is that the Sharia tradition includes urf. You're from where? Morocco. What's an urfi practice in Morocco that everybody's comfortable with, all the Muslims are comfortable with? That is part of the masjid tradition or the home tradition. Okay. Now, of course, one can argue that that is part of the core Sunni tradition and the Shia tradition, right? They're celebrating. But in Morocco, it's special, okay? But in Saudi Arabia, today, it's not special, right? The Wahhabi tradition has said, no, this is not good, okay? But go to almost every other tradition, Malaysian, Indonesian, Moroccan, Egyptian, Pakistani, celebrating the Mawlid is a big deal, right? Now, there are some other issues with this.
Just a question. Why do we all have to follow the Sunni, Shafi, Maliki? Why don't we follow his prophets? He didn't have any
Great question.
foundation in.
That's a fantastic question.
Why don't we just follow what he said?
Okay. All right, let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do it as an exercise. Because I think this is a very important question, and I think American Muslims always ask this question. Modern Muslims, by modern Muslims I mean Muslims living today, I ask this question. Why do I need to follow Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi? How many years of Arabic have you studied? How many years of Arabic have you studied?
I didn't know.
How many years of Arabic have you studied?
Arabic, I was beaten up to read the
I know,
Quran.
you told me.
So that's about it.
There's a trauma here.
It is a trauma.
I know.
Pakistan,
Yeah, you
yeah.
beat
You beat you up and you read the Quran.
So the reason I asked that question is, before you can independently access the 2 source texts, you've got to have a sound grasp of the Arabic language, a sound grasp of aqidah, fiqh, like 10 different sciences. And to top it off, you need to understand usul al-fiqh, which is the most complex of the intellectual sciences, not the spiritual sciences in the Muslim tradition. Right? You need to have a sound grasp of it before you can actually do what you suggested, which is follow the Quran and Sunnah. And you know, in the Muslim tradition, in the scholarly tradition, those people were called mujtahideen, that they could independently look at the text and say, my school says this, I was taught this, and I agree with it, but I'm going to have a different opinion. And it's because of this reason. That capacity is the capacity of the mujtahid. You need to study 20 years before you can be a mujtahid. How many of us have done that? So practically in the Muslim history, we ended up following one of these schools. Simply because we didn't have the interest or the focus to independently come to this massive education, which one could simply ask, well, Islam is not complex. It's not complex. It's not complex because the scholars have actually made it simplified, right? But if you're going to answer a question that hasn't been asked, and you don't know half the relevant verses of the Quran or the constraints of the Sunnah, how are you going to answer it? What are the categories of marriage that you're not allowed? The man is prohibited from marrying what class of woman? The obvious?
The obvious, and his foster sisters and.
No, can you be more specific about the obviousness?
Okay, well, his father and daughter, his sisters, his nieces, the.
Aunts. Let's focus on aunts. Which aunts? Both aunts? Father, sister, and mother, sister? In the Quran, which one is mentioned? Huh? Maternal. How about the paternal aunt? Paternal, that's not mentioned in the Quran. Where do you get that constraint from?
Because you can only have one, paternal twin cousins, they're okay. You can have one woman married to, get married.
No, but that's not the answer. You just made up that answer. That's not the answer. We can always make up answers that feel good to us. That's okay. That's okay. That is okay. Right? But that is not the answer. The answer is that Rasulullah ﷺ said the other category. It's not mentioned in the Quran. And scholars had to resolve this question. And they had to lean into the Sunnah, into the Hadith, into the statement of the Prophet, to then answer the Sharia question, which is all of these both ants category. But both ants don't appear in the Quran. The question is, why not? Anybody have that question in your mind? Why not? Why didn't Allah say both categories of ants? You know, the scholars never answered this question because they can't answer it. We don't have an 800 number to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That 800 number was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He left it. On the day of judgment, you can all ask it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Polygamy is was allowed, right? Polyandry wasn't allowed.
Yes. Polygyny was allowed, polyandry isn't allowed. Yeah.
So a man could marry more than once.
No, but that's not the answer.
But I'm saying that you could have, paternal. You would have a situation where you would have.
No, but the category that's included in the Quran is the maternal aunt, right? So the maternal aunt is the sister of your mother. But how about the sister of your father? Can you marry her? According to the Quran, that is not a prohibited category, but according to the Sunnah, it is. So my point was, if you don't have the training of all of these source texts, then you'll miss the boat on that answer. In fact, this very question, a young person that I was teaching, he asked me this question. He said, "What does Islam so can I?" I said, "No, sir. The Quran doesn't restrict it. The Sunnah does." Right? So this is it's a very simple example. I can give you more complex examples, but then I need to take you through a layered set of texts. So this is a simple example to sort of understand. If you don't know the text, you can completely miss the boat on the answer. So to answer your question, it's an almost impossible task. To individually, each one of us in this room, to become an expert to answer
The
all
reason
the
I
questions.
asked the question.
Yeah, of course, it's a great
I
question.
brought it up that in China, little town, the woman can do a song and they can do
Yes,
a song.
yes.
So why can't we do it here? If proper
Just because
proper people allow that, why can't we do it? Why can't we just tell them, stand up and we'll stand behind you and we'll do it?
You mean the women?
Yeah?
Oh, okay. I didn't understand the
No,
question. Yeah, so different schools of thought have different opinions about it. Tabari, who was a great commentator of the Quran, you know the Tafsir al-Tabari, and history, the huge voluminous history he wrote. He's of the opinion that a woman can lead mixed gender. A woman can always lead non-mixed. A woman can always lead women only. Okay, all of the schools prohibit a woman leading a mixed gender audience, mixed gender group. Okay, all of them, pretty consistently. But Tabari, who was a scholar, a mufassir, said this. It's one of the points of Sharia. Right? Okay, let's go back to Sharia for a
Just
second.
to clarify.
Yeah.
This,
This is an issue.
yeah.
Okay, now,
No, I'm just saying, these are all opinions.
yes, yes.
Neither is another saying.
Yes.
It is from our side. All I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
that in my opinion, Islam has given equal rights to men and women. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Quran came centuries ago. We live in a modern world, and not only that, our Prophet has set us an example, exactly what you said, that the little town of, I never knew that, but thank you for telling me, the little town of China, a woman
China is a big country.
given the permission to do that.
No, but
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
give permission to lead other women, not other.
Yeah, not mixed gender.
That's what I'm trying to
Those
clarify.
are exclusive woman-only masajid.
Right.
It's not,
Okay.
men are not allowed to go.
Okay, so we could probably build an inclusive mosque for women and.
Another 4 million like this around the corner? No, it's too expensive.
No,
And we cannot build anything less than 4 million. Right?
I understand that you can pick and choose. Okay, this has this inclusive woman, mosque. That's why it was allowed. I don't think so. It probably, it could. In my opinion, what he said was correct. That you can do it anywhere.
Okay.
It's my opinion. Okay, again.
I know, and this is one of the challenges of the modern Muslim communities. That we do have the modern framework of individuality and perspective and position, but it's not accompanied by the rigorous training that one needs to have truly a valid and a defensible position. Okay, I mean, I can have tons of opinions.
Even in also non-Muslim, there are a lot of questions that
Yeah, of
in
course.
Islam, women have no rights. They don't have them because they hear that. So here we have to somehow prove them.
No.
They have them.
No, I disagree. I just disagree because I think then you're going into the trope, the lie that the Islamophobic elements of our society promote about Islam, that women have no rights. Well, that's not true. So instead of sort of correcting that position, we can then turn around and say, well, you're right, and by the way, let me prove that women do have rights, and we have a woman imam, and I'm going to pray behind her. So this logical thing, it's a very problematic path to justifying that Islam protects the rights of women or honors women and so on. There are 10 other ways to do it, right? So I think when we discuss with our non-Muslim friends and neighbors, and one of the things I found as a side note is that you must have a discussion like we're having. This is the answer to women's rights or the perception of the lack of women's rights in the Muslim tradition. It's not a 30-second soundbite answer. Don't attempt to answer that question as a 30-second soundbite. Why? You'll fail. Right? After I started teaching this course probably 20 years ago. 9/11 was less than 20 years ago, right? After 9/11, before 9/11, I used to do a 2-hour session, maybe 1 or 2. After 9/11, when I used to do these sessions, people would be more frustrated after finish 1 or 2 sessions. That's why I developed a 10-part. Because if somebody really wants to know, you cannot explain the complexity of the Muslim history and tradition in a 2-hour conversation. Because generally the American audience, who are very hungry and are patient, they will go through this. Who are very hungry and are not patient, they want the answer to all of the troubling questions in the first 5 minutes. Tell me why Islam is homophobic. Tell me why Islam is against gender. Tell me why Islam is violent. And they want all that answered in 5 minutes. We've been spending how many minutes on fatwa and sharia? Right? So we do have a challenge, right? But I think if we approach our engagement with our non-Muslim neighbors in a rational way, in a way that engages them, in a way that is truthful, okay? It doesn't hide things, right? You don't bury things. I started with the FGM, the female genital mutilation. I mean, there are countries where Muslims practice this. That has nothing to do with the Muslim tradition, right? Urfi approach would say, hey, this is their urf, leave them alone, okay? Unless the urf can be shown to create harm. And there is enough medical information today that FGM is actually harmful to the woman, even though historic societies practice this. And there are Muslim scholars of the past who justified FGM. There are 50 books that you can read. It's good for the woman because of blah, 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 blah. It's a non-medical opinion, but they say it, right? It's there. Now, if a crazy Islamophobe picks up that text, mistranslated by some other crazy guy, and reads it, and then says, oh, this is Islam, then what are you going to do? Well, you need to understand and then respond appropriately. Yes?
Wouldn't it be against the Sunnah as well, given the hadith on gender relations and marriage relations and pleasure on both sides and things like that?
You can write your master's thesis on it. And people have done that. Right? It's not worthy of a PhD. But yeah, it's a simple question to answer. When the Prophet said, send her a good messenger, right? When he talked about spousal relations, what did he say? He said, send your wife a messenger. And Sahaba, what is a messenger? He said, sweet words and kisses. Don't jump her. Right? Sweet words and kisses. What was he saying? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He was saying, make it a beautiful experience. Satisfy her. Men apparently get satisfied in 2 minutes, but women have a different need, and you have to respond to that. That's what the Prophet ﷺ taught us.
There is also the verse in the Quran
Yes?
that says, وَقَدِّمُوا لَنفُسَكُمْ.
Yep. So you see, Islam is a beautiful tradition. We should be proud of it. That's the wrong word. We should be grateful for our scholars who did such an amazing thing of beautifying this religion. This is a beautiful religion. Right? This is a beautiful religion.
But the innovation is bid'ah. Did the woman lead the prayer in the time of Prophet?
I just gave you an example of where the Prophet allowed it.
He allowed it, right?
He did. But I'm also telling you that our fiqh traditions didn't take that instance, okay, and standardize it. Except for women-exclusive mosques or groups, right? If the sisters here had a baby shower, I don't know, a woman's only baby shower, and time of Maghrib came, you can all get together and one of you can lead. Absolutely acceptable, right? Women have done that. Women all lead with a woman imam. That's absolutely acceptable. What the fiqh traditions don't accept, all four of them in the Sunni tradition, is a woman leading a mixed gender one. And there are scholars who are sort of modern scholars who have challenged that. But here's the thing about the Sharia tradition. What is Sharia? The accumulated writings on theology, ethics, and the legal tradition, everything that is in scope, both binding and non-binding. That's important. The Sharia tradition includes all of what is binding because it was instituted or enforced by the court, by the qadi, and non-binding because a scholar gave his or her opinion on the answer and you that asked him or her followed it. That's a non-binding thing. That's only for the one who followed it. But it doesn't become binding on the family or the society or the society at large. But the Sharia tradition includes all of that. And if you don't know the difference, what was binding in the past, what was binding in the past but no longer binding today, what was non-binding in the past but somehow has become binding today, out of general practice, not because the court said it, and so on. There's a whole layer and sets of complexities here. Right? The Sharia is historical, it's extensive, and has a wide spectrum of conservative and liberal perspectives. You know, we think the Sharia is conservative, or some, Fox News people tell you that. Or some people tell you it's very liberal. No, it has both positions. The spectrum of, and it's primarily first a function of what do you define as liberal and conservative? Depends on what your definition is, right? How do you define it? See, we are using words that are relevant to our American context, but may have no relevance to the Sharia tradition. Okay? Some of our best scholars in the world, Muslim scholars today, are the ones who are steeped in the Sharia tradition and are also steeped in the Western academic traditions. When they combine both, they are the ones who are capable of navigating both spaces, right? And explaining and clarifying. Right? And that's important. That's important. Okay, the Sharia has evolved and continues to evolve. It continues to evolve. It has never stopped. It cannot stop. Why can't it stop? It cannot stop until the day of judgment comes. Because until the day of judgment, we'll have people who will ask questions, we'll have scholars who will give us answers. Right? So, again, you have raised a very important question. Why can't we just follow the Quran and Sunnah? Because to understand the Quran and Sunnah is a complex endeavor. It is not a simply open a book. And again, the simplest example is, if you're going to be a medical doctor, okay, you can be a patient and go to a doctor without knowing anything fundamentally about your issue, and follow the advice of a scholar, a doctor, or get a second or third opinion, or a consensus opinion, and this happens sometimes when it's a complex disease, you get a consensus opinion with 3 or 4 expert doctors, right? The same thing happens in the Sharia tradition. It's a complex question, a number of scholars will get together and answer that question. The other things I want to say about Sharia, I'll say one of them, and that is that the evolution of the Sharia in the modern world, the Sharia scholars recognize that knowledge has become, in the modern world, deep and multiple. You had these Renaissance scholars of the past who knew medicine and math and astronomy and a whole bunch of other sciences, including all of the sacred sciences, which are 10 plus sciences. Right? And they knew everything. Today, it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to do that. So today, the Sharia scholars, the ones who think about system-level issues, they talk about the Sharia-trained scholars, the ones who are trained on the 2 source texts and all of the sacred sciences, cooperating and working with those who are experts in other domains, scientific domains, engineering domains, the social science domains, all of these things, and cooperating to find the complex answers to questions. Right? That is the emerging, it started happening in the late 19th century, and certainly has gone through the 20th century, and now we are in the 21st. So this is an important point I want to leave you with, that it is important to recognize the complexity of modern life, and recognize that this endeavor is a complex endeavor. We shouldn't take it lightly, and we should encourage more of our children to go into these sciences, become highly trained Muslim scholars, right? Men and women, not just men, right? It's amazing, Sheikh. Forgetting his first name, Sheikh Nadwi from London. Does anybody know? Looking to use Ishan. So anyway, there is this Sheikh from London. He's trained from India, and he wrote a large volume investigating the lives of Muslim women scholars, and he collected 1,000 women scholars from Muslim history to demonstrate the impact of women scholarship in the Sharia tradition. Okay, that's very important. It's important because if men are the only people going into that field, and women are not participating, half of our ummah is unable to give the perspective that is needed to answer questions in Sharia. Right? And we should not, as traditionally Muslim men tend to do, here is Islam and all of the Sharia subjects, and here is this women's issues thing. What does that mean? All of this doesn't apply to women? All of it applies to women. Some of the things that are specific to women don't apply to men. So don't reduce the Sharia of women to the women-specific things, because everything else applies to women. And so women can give answers to all of these general categories equally capably as men can, provided they enter into that field.
I guess this answers why the Prophet ﷺ married to Aisha.
Yeah, this is a
Because
very,
Aisha
very important
lived
point.
long
Yeah.
years, after him,
Yes.
and was teaching.
She was a teacher of the Tabi'in.
companions at the time.
Yeah. Aisha, a scholar, what scholars say about Aisha radiallahu anha? She represents half of the religion. Half of the religion. Half of what came out of the companions came out of her. Why? Everything that was of the personal life of the Prophet, it's Aisha's narrations. Because who lived with him? The other wives of the Prophet, they gave, they narrated from him. But Aisha is the most prolific narrator from the Prophet ﷺ amongst the women and amongst the wives of the Prophet. And the scholars say it's half of the religion. What she taught is half of the religion. Right? And she just didn't teach what the Prophet taught. She was what? She was a muftiyah. She was qualified, right, to give opinions. Right? And she would challenge some of the most prominent men Sahabis, saying, "You're wrong." And they say, "What? I'm wrong?" Here's the reason why. How did Aisha? You're right, and I'm wrong. Right? And the commands used to be corrected by Aisha.
You're talking about Muhammad Akram Nadwi?
Yes.
Cambridge?
Thank you, Muhammad Akram Nadwi. You were doing the Google search, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Sheikh Google. Sheikh Google is good at that. But otherwise, it's not too good. Okay, so yes, Muhammad Akram Nadwi, may Allah be so pleased with him for this voluminous work that he's done, showing the immense contribution of the Muslims.
How old is this work? How old is this work?
A few years. He published it, what,
This is 2007, the particular publication is
Yeah.
2007.
It's a recent thing. And he has his own seminary in Oxford, or Cambridge, sorry. He teaches in Cambridge. But he has his own seminary.
Just going back, you mentioned
Yes.
two Jewish courts in the city of New York.
Yes,
Are their decisions accepted by state of New York?
the great question. So we talk about scope, right? So those decisions, if two Jewish people want to adjudicate an issue, they go to that court. And they have to submit to the court's decision. If one of them who doesn't like the answer says, "Oh, I don't like it," then he can go
Okay,
to
that's
the civil court. Yeah.
They can go to other state courts.
Yeah, and the civil courts will
I
try.
didn't like your decision, so I'm going to sue you, put you in a divorce
Yeah,
case.
but that-
I don't like it.
Yeah, but that is the methodology of the court systems, the hierarchy of court systems in the U.S. anyway.
But state of New York gave them the permission to have.
It's not state of New York. It's a federal. There's nothing in the federal constitutional law that prevents you from having
Oh,
this.
really?
There is nothing, and that's the reason why when Muslims say, "Oh no, don't talk about Sharia courts." You don't know your constitution. You don't understand your constitution. You can have a Sharia court.
Unless it's specifically banned, like in 30 states, or 40 states.
Well, I don't know, but all those were overturned.
Yes.
Care overturned more than 90% of them. Just by suing and saying, "What are you doing? It's against your U.S. Constitution." Right? These 30 or plus state legislatures passed this bogus thing, and the state Supreme Courts kicked them all out. Right now, there's only one or two, I think, Tennessee and Kentucky, I think, that it hasn't been kicked out, but that's a progressive case. So even the state courts kicked out all of this brouhaha that happened in 2012, right before the Obama second elections, that, we have to ban Sharia from the United States law. Sharia.
Well, it's a classic example of Muslim marriage, that you get married in a mosque,
Yeah.
and if you don't go to the city or court, get your marriage certificate, you're not married.
You're not married in the eyes of the
I
eyes
can
of the
stand
state.
on my own daughter.
Yes, yes. I understand.
Now, she got married by Muslim scholar.
Yes,
We never went to the court, she forgot, we forgot.
yeah,
She was in Bahrain,
yes.
so they needed,
Yeah.
you know, how to acquire.
Sure.
Yeah, my son needed a marriage certificate. So,
You did have one.
they gave them
Yeah,
Muslim certificate.
wasn't recognized.
And they said, this is not a certificate.
Sure.
I want a marriage certificate from your state, from your state. So I have to get them 10 years later. So it means she was not married coming to the state of New York, state of New York, she
Correct.
was not married for 10 years.
Correct. Except in the state of Pennsylvania, she would be accepted.
So I have
Because
to
of
get
the
them
federal
10 years
law.
and remarry them in the city code right here in Mercer County.
Okay, so that's a great learning lesson for
Exactly
you.
right.
You're not going to repeat that with your granddaughter and child.
Not talking about Sharia laws, you know,
No.
that's exactly what happened.
So one thing about Sharia is that Sharia automatically recognizes the laws of the land unless, again, the laws of the land contravene, Nas contravene.